The light in the room was fading, stretching across the wooden floor in long strips of muted gold. At 77, Ralph Fiennes sat in a quiet corner of his Suffolk home, a place far removed from the camera flashes and red carpets that had once defined his days. Outside, the late autumn wind brushed against the window, carrying with it the faint scent of wet leaves, a reminder that time had its own way of speaking. There was nothing theatrical in the way he moved. His hands rested calmly on his knees, his breath steady, his gaze distant. He looked like a man revisiting a memory he had tried, for decades, to keep locked away. And when he finally exhaled, the words that emerged were almost fragile, as if they had been carried inside him too long. "There are 5 people," he said quietly, "who left scars on my soul. Not anger, not accusation, just a simple, devastating truth." Ralph Fiennes, the man who had embodied kings, monsters, ghosts, lovers, was not speaking as an actor now, but as a human being stripped bare by time. His life, so often associated with elegance and mystery, carried wounds the world had never seen. He leaned back slightly, letting the dim light outline the tired grace on his face. "Scar," he murmured, "are proof we survived, not that we healed." 5 names, 5 stories, and somewhere among them, though he did not say it yet, was a face more haunting than the others. But who were they? And why, after a lifetime of discipline and restraint, did he finally choose to speak now? Before the world knew his name, before he stepped onto grand stages or carried entire films with a single quiet look, Ralph Fiennes was a boy growing up in a family where imagination and melancholy lived side by side. Born into a household of artists, a photographer mother, a writer father, he breathed creativity as naturally as air. Yet beneath the warmth of that artistic world lay a subtle, persistent fragility. The Fiennes home was not loud. It was a place of gentle conversations, long silences, books left open on tables, and a kind of floating sadness that no one fully named. Ralph, even as a child, felt everything too deeply. He noticed the way his mother's smile sometimes trembled, the way his father's quietness grew heavier in the evenings, the way emotions seemed to seep into the walls. He was the eldest of 6, a position that brought both responsibility and solitude. He learned early that strength did not always mean speaking. Sometimes it meant absorbing the chaos so others did not have to. And so he became the still center of the household, the quiet observer, the boy who carried more than he ever admitted. School never felt like a refuge. He was shy, introspective, often misunderstood. But the theater, dim lights, wooden floors, the smell of dust and possibility, became his sanctuary. Acting offered him what words never could, the chance to feel without explanation, to release emotions he had spent his childhood containing. Yet even as he grew into his talent, a wound formed beneath the surface, a sense that connection was fragile, that love demanded caution, that joy could disappear without warning. The tragedies in Shakespeare, the broken men he played on stage, felt less like characters and more like mirrors. And when he left home to pursue acting professionally, he carried with him a truth he had learned too early. Some hearts are shaped not by what they receive, but by what they quietly endure. That endurance, patient, silent, unspoken, would later draw him toward people who left marks deeper than any performance, people whose presence carved the very scars he would one day name. Ralph Fiennes did not rise like a comet blazing through the night sky. His ascent was quieter, more deliberate, the slow unfurling of a man whose emotional interior was far more intricate than any character he would later portray. When he entered the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, he arrived with little noise, no bravado, and none of the effortless social confidence that others seemed to carry like a second skin. Yet there was something unmistakable about him, a gravity, a depth, a kind of hushed intensity that made even silence feel meaningful. During early rehearsals, he rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he began to work, something shifted. His presence expanded, not through force, but through an uncanny sensitivity. He felt scenes rather than performed them. He listened with his whole body. Directors often said he didn't audition, he revealed. You could sense the emotional architecture beneath his stillness, as if he contained stories too heavy to be spoken plainly. Shakespeare was where his talent truly ignited. The tragedies did not intimidate him. They called to him like old companions. Hamlet's uncertainty, Richard III's fractured ambition, even the monstrous cruelty of characters he would later play, none of it frightened him. Instead, he approached each role with the precision of someone dismantling his own memories. His colleagues described him as dangerously vulnerable on stage, capable of shifting from absolute control to a trembling rawness within a single breath. Audiences were mesmerized. This was not performance in the conventional sense. It was excavation. Film found him soon after. In Wuthering Heights, his portrayal of Heathcliff felt less like acting and more like a wound being reopened. But it was the English patient that changed everything. Fiennes did not play the haunted lover. He seemed to inhabit the very skin of yearning, of loss, of a man devoured by a love too vast for the world. The role made him globally recognizable, yet the newfound fame only exaggerated his solitude. Public life did not come naturally to him. He moved through premieres with a courteous detachment, as if watching his own life from a slight distance. Interviewers were captivated by his eloquence and precision, yet sensed he never fully let them in. He spoke thoughtfully, but rarely intimately. His soul remained an interior landscape, wide, complex, and fiercely protected. Then came Schindler's List, a role that demanded he step into the abyss, a role so dark, so morally corrosive, that he feared what it might awaken. "I didn't portray cruelty," he said once. "I confronted the possibility of it." The performance was extraordinary, chilling, unforgettable, but it left him shaken. He carried the character long after filming ended, as though the shadows clung to him. It was the kind of role that earned accolades but extracted a private cost. As the years passed, Ralph's artistry deepened, but so did the quiet fractures beneath the surface. He gave more of himself to each character, until the line between his inner life and his roles grew dangerously thin. The world saw refinement, mastery, sophistication, but beneath the elegance was a man slowly eroding under the weight of unspoken burdens. And as those burdens grew, certain people, some loved, some trusted, some unexpected, found ways to leave marks he would carry for decades, marks he would one day call scars on his soul. The ruptures in Ralph Fiennes' life did not arrive with dramatic shouts or shattered glass. They came quietly, in whispers, in pauses, in the subtle shift of someone's gaze. Like hairline cracks in a piece of porcelain, they began almost invisibly, until one day they grew too deep to ignore. The first rupture came at the height of his early success. Ralph had always guarded his inner world carefully, offering only glimpses of himself to those closest to him. And yet he trusted deeply, perhaps too deeply. In his early 30s, he entered a relationship he believed would anchor him, soften the sharp edges of his solitude. He gave himself slowly, cautiously, with a tenderness that surprised even him. But love, he would later say, is sometimes a mirror that shows us our blind spots. And one day, without storm or warning, the relationship broke. Not through betrayal, not through cruelty, but through absence. The slow, painful realization that two people who once moved toward each other had begun to drift apart in silence. It felt, he said, like watching a door close from the other side. The second rupture was harsher. It came from someone he had believed was a lifelong friend, a confidant who turned his vulnerabilities into private judgment. Ralph discovered late and painfully that certain people stay close not out of loyalty, but out of convenience. Learning this carved a hollow space in him, a space that made future trust difficult. Then came fame's shadow. As his career ascended, expectations rose with it. The more the world praised his emotional depth, the more he felt trapped by what he represented. Some directors demanded not just a performance, but pieces of his actual grief. He became, without meaning to, a vessel for the darkest parts of human nature. "I realized," he said softly, "that I was giving away parts of myself that did not grow back." Over the years, the ruptures multiplied, not in spectacle, but in accumulation. A sibling misunderstanding that lingered for years. A collaborator who betrayed a confidence. A love he let go too late. A regret he confronted too late. They did not break him outright, but they thinned him, layer by layer, until the man behind the roles stood exposed, not destroyed, but undeniably scarred. It was from these intimate fractures that the five faces emerged, the ones he would carry with him into old age. When Ralph Fiennes finally agreed to speak about the five people who left scars on his soul, his voice carried neither resentment nor bitterness. Instead, it held the quiet weight of someone who has spent a lifetime studying the most fragile corners of the human heart, including his own. Scars, he murmured, are simply the memories that refuse to fade, and each of these memories carried a face. The mentor who taught him to doubt himself. He met him in his early 20s, a seasoned theater director admired for his brilliance and feared for his ruthlessness. He praised Ralph's talent, but always with a shadow attached, a hesitation, a subtle critique, a quiet suggestion that he was almost, but never quite, enough. It was mentorship built on imbalance. Every compliment felt conditional. Every achievement felt borrowed. Ralph would spend years unlearning the belief that his worth came from someone else's approval. I never forgave him, he said, because he made me question the very part of myself that should have been sacred. The friend who misused his trust. There was a time when Ralph believed friendship was a sanctuary, a place without performance, without masks. In his 30s, he grew close to a collaborator who seemed to understand him instinctively. They shared long conversations, private doubts, and the quiet companionship that artists crave. But admiration can sour, and envy has a way of disguising itself as loyalty. He discovered, slowly and painfully, that this friend had been using his name, his reputation, and his personal confessions as currency in social circles. Not a loud betrayal, a soft one, the kind that leaves deeper wounds because it never announces itself. It taught me, Ralph said, that proximity is not the same as loyalty. The love who left without saying goodbye. She entered his life like a breath of warmth, gentle, intelligent, intuitive. She understood the silences he spoke in, and for a time he allowed himself to believe he had finally found someone who could share the quiet landscapes of his soul. But love, he learned, is not always steady. Sometimes it unravels slowly, pulled apart by unseen threads. One morning she simply left. No cruelty, no dramatic ending, only the kind of finality that comes when two hearts have drifted too far from one another. It wasn't her leaving, he said. It was realizing I never saw the distance until it was too late. It left in him a scar shaped like absence, the most silent kind of wound. The colleague who revealed his own darkness. Fame demands sacrifices, but some take more than they give. Ralph once worked closely with an actor he admired, someone charismatic, magnetic, and effortlessly charming. Over time, however, the man's behavior shifted. He mocked Ralph's seriousness, dismissed his vulnerabilities, and turned moments of trust into private amusement. The cruelty was subtle, disguised as humor, framed as just teasing, but it chipped away at Ralph's confidence, piece by piece. It wasn't what he said, Ralph recalled. It was realizing he found entertainment in the parts of me I protected most. This scar taught him the harsh truth that not everyone drawn to your light comes with light of their own. Himself, the one wound that never closed. The final name on the list came slowly, painfully, inevitably. Ralph, after a long pause, said quietly, "The person I have struggled most to forgive is myself, for the missed chances, for the silences he allowed to become barriers, for the relationships he abandoned out of fear, not intention, for every moment he chose duty over love, performance over truth." He spoke of the years he spent hiding behind roles, believing he could only be understood through characters, never as himself. "I carried a loneliness I didn't know how to put down," he said, "and instead of facing it, I let it shape me. Forgiving others was difficult. Forgiving himself felt impossible. But naming himself as the fifth person was the beginning of something new, a reconciliation, a softening, an understanding that he had survived his own limitations as much as anyone else's. These 5 faces, these 5 scars, did not define Ralph Fiennes, but they shaped him, quietly, profoundly, into the man who now speaks them aloud, not in anger, but in acceptance. For in the end, scars are simply reminders of where the soul has been broken and where it has learned slowly to mend. At 77, Ralph Fiennes moves through life with the calm assurance of a man who has finally stopped trying to conceal his wounds. He no longer treats his scars as strangers to be hidden, but as quiet companions that walk beside him through every triumph, every silence, every role that demanded more than he knew he had. His home now is a place of stillness, books stacked beside soft armchairs, old scripts marked with fading ink, windows that open onto the muted grays of the English countryside. There are mornings when he rises before the sun, makes tea in the half-light, and stands by the window simply watching the fog lift. It is in these fragile moments that he feels the distance between who he was and who he has finally allowed himself to become. I don't speak of these 5 people to reopen wounds, he says. I speak of them so the wounds no longer decide the shape of my days. The first 4, the mentor, the friend, the lost love, the colleague, have become chapters rather than weights. Their memories no longer burn. They whisper, they warn, they remind. And the 5th, himself, is slowly becoming someone he can treat with tenderness instead of scrutiny, someone he can meet without turning away, someone he can forgive, not because he deserves it, but because life asks for nothing less if one wishes to grow old with grace. He no longer seeks resolution. He seeks quiet. He seeks the kind of peace that arrives not with answers, but with acceptance. And as the evening settles around him like a gentle shroud, we are left to wonder, what do our scars become once we stop hiding them? And who might we finally be when forgiveness turns inward?